Joining us now, Texas Governor from the great Republic of Texas, Greg Abbott. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for joining us. Before I let you go and get started on all these questions, I was noticing the weather in Texas. It's going to be hotter than Hades. I mean, almost, I think, literally, not an exaggeration next weekend. And I was thinking, I wonder if the grid's going to be okay with this. And I saw that you had just signed a law to reform ERCOT, ERCOT, which is the company that handles all that, to weatherize and improve that grid. Tell us about that, because that's a nightmare if our AC goes out.
Don't worry about your AC. Dana, as you now know, we have hot weather in the summertime every year in Texas. But importantly for you and your listeners, especially those in Texas, to know, we completely reformed the power grid system in the state of Texas to fix all the flaws and so much more. I'll quickly run through what we did. We instilled accountability in the two agencies that run the grid. One is ERCOT, and the other is the Public Utilities Commission. We also put in there the ability for them to impose fines and penalties on entities that do not comply with their standards. The standards are set out in the weatherization. It's not winterization, because although what we did was to make the power grid more resilient in the winter, but we call it weatherization because we want to make sure that it's resilient in the summer also. And then also we have grid integrity. Let me explain what that means. This is going to make you shake your head, Danny, when you hear what happened. What really caused the winter storm was really quite simple. It was operator error combined with a lack of grid integrity. What I mean by that is, when the winter storm happened and they needed to shut down power to certain areas, there were certain areas that were exempt from being shut down. A downtown, a hospital, a police station are exempt from being shut down. All the power generators in the state, as well as transmission lines in the state, they were not exempt from the shutdown. Hence, they were shut down and they froze, and thus it turned a one-day event into a four-day event. All that has to be done to fix that is to check off a two-page form and submit it to ERCOT. That has been done. And then there's increased capacity. So as you know, Texas is growing very rapidly. So many people moving here, businesses, individuals, et cetera. We're going to have more need for power, and we have greater power capacity, as you and I are speaking today, than Texas has ever had. And so I can give you more details, but the bottom line is this. Everything that needed to be fixed to ensure the power grid would remain operational has been fixed for both summer and winter.
That's incredibly good to hear. I'm happy to hear that. And I love a good dry heat. That's what they always told us when we moved down here about 8.5 years ago. They said, it's a dry heat. The humidity is so high today, dry heat. It's almost like being in New Orleans, that dry heat. And I love that, how easy, I love being able to hold these people accountable as well and making sure this stuff can get solved. Because I remember just in the days after the great freeze, as we all like to say, and that was something funny. My friends and I were always discussing, if we ever have to move, make sure that you're in that grid, make sure that you're behind a hospital or a police station so that way you can always be included. Because, Governor, as you know, a lot of the criticism that we saw from the left particularly had to do with, Texas decided to go it alone. They didn't want to be a part of they didn't want to be a part of federal regulation on the grid or on gas lines or on anything else. But that's not the case, because you're still always going to have human error and things, no matter if it's with federal or state.
For one, and the human error component was fixed, as well as adding additional accountability so there will not be human error in the future. But then one thing I didn't mention, which is important to emphasize, we restructured it in a way that will ensure that Texas will remain independent from the United States in our power grid. We will continue to have our own power grid, which will have more abundant power than any other power grid in America.
Excellent news. Excellent news. We're talking with Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Governor, you also, I'm going to pull this up because you said you're going to build a wall. You're going to build a barrier along the state's border with Mexico. And that you said this, so I have to let you know, my husband and I, we always have our family dinners with our kids, and we always have very lively discussions, as you can imagine. And one of the things that my husband had said is that, why doesn't the governor just go down and say, okay, this is where you're going to build the wall, the federal wall. The governor could go down and say, here, about 5 inches away or 5 feet away or however, this is our wall right here, and just kind of, and you're doing that. Tell us a little bit about that. I know that from what I've read so far, there's not a lot of details out about it, but you said that first off, you're going to start arresting people who try to breach the barrier, but Texas is going to have its own barrier.
So it's a multi-step It's a multi-step process, Dana. One is the wall, and it will be next week when I make the formal announcement about what we will be doing about building the wall. In addition to the wall, there is going to be an initial barrier. I was in on the border last night itself in Del Rio, where we were talking to landowners, hundreds of landowners, and I asked all of them, how many of you have property that goes all the way up to the borderline? Hundreds raised their hand. I said, how many of you would allow the state of Texas to come in and put up an immediate barrier right there on the border itself? Hands went up across the board. We're going to begin the process of that initial border barrier right there on the border itself. And some of this land also is owned by the state of Texas, where we have the immediate right to put this immediate border barrier up. Then in addition to that will be the wall component, which will be very similar to the approach that President Trump took. And we will be announcing more details about that component next week. However, I do want to emphasize the other thing that we were talking to locals about last night in Del Rio. We had about 100 sheriffs and law enforcement officials there, all of the border sheriffs, as well as some further inland, where we were working with them to collaborate on this arrest program, because we want to start putting people in jail who come across the border. When they come across the border, they're going to be trespassing in the state of Texas. That area right now is subject to a disaster declaration. When it's subject to a disaster declaration, that elevates the level of a penalty. If otherwise a trespass would be a Class C misdemeanor, it's now either a Class B or Class A misdemeanor. We can put these people in jail for coming across the border, coming into the state of Texas. What we want to do is the converse or the opposite of what the Biden administration is doing. They're rolling out the red carpet, saying that the border is open, anybody can come here and roam around, do whatever they want to once they get here. We're saying no more about that. You come across the border in the state of Texas, you're going to jail. And we're now going to have both the laws in place, the manpower in place, the jails involved, because listen, this is going to involve a lot more jails, jail cells and jail beds than would have been occupied in the past. And so we have to get the jail commission involved, working with locals as well as with state officials to make sure we can create more beds. But it also is going to require the state legislature stepping up. You may know that we may be having a special session sometime soon where we're going to be able to address these needs and make sure that we do secure the border, we do build a border wall, but also we accomplish some other things also.
What makes this, we're talking with Texas Governor Greg Abbott, what makes this different from under the Obama-Biden administration when governors were trying to do this previously, just enforce their own, these border states, enforce border laws themselves, and whenever they attempted something like this, the administration would entangle them in lawsuits. I watched Arizona go through this, and I know it was threatened, Texas was threatened with with a similar suit. Do you anticipate something like this with the Biden administration, and does that emergency declaration change it?
The declaration doesn't change the legal risk. I'll tell you this, Dana, you know I'm the former Attorney General in Texas, so as you might imagine, I've gone through the legal. Yeah, exactly. And so I've gone through the legal analysis. I know all about the lawsuit of Arizona versus the United States, where the Supreme Court ruled against Jan Brewer in the state of Arizona and what they tried to do there. What we're trying to do is different. What we're trying to do, I will tell you, we'll be working on state land. We'll be working on private property land. We're going to be working on land that will not be the federal government. The federal government cannot tell Texas or Texans what to do with their land. And so they will have no right to step in to do what we are seeking to do. So we have a way to do this where, sure, I think they will file a lawsuit. They will try to stop us in any way they can. But I think that we will be able to overcome that lawsuit, prevail in that lawsuit, and continue in our goal, and that is to do what the federal government should be doing, which is securing the border. Texas is having to step up. Then I do have to add this, because even though we are stepping up, people need to understand that Texas has already stepped up more than any other state ever has. This legislature in the Capitol, they just passed a budget adding more than $1 billion for border security for just the next 2 years in the state of Texas. That will add more boots on the ground, more drones and helicopters in the air, more boats on the water. We will be doing more than ever before to be able to arrest people, to secure the border. But we need to take this next step and build the border barriers that are needed to keep people out of Texas. Last thing, Dan, I got to tell you, and talking to the men and women on the border, they're being truly invaded by people who are coming into their property, who are ransacking their property, opening their fences, cutting their gates, destroying their property. causing them to lose livestock, lose wild game, things like that, and have guns shoved into their faces. America and Texans, they need to understand the serious challenges that people on the border are having and the necessity of Texas stepping up and helping them out.
Yep, that Mexican, I just actually had a headline about this earlier, the Mexican cartel violence spilling over. One last quick question for you, Texas Governor Greg Abbott. You just mentioned that special session. Are you going into the special session confident that we're going to see, because I know we got constitutional carry, which was one of my big things. I'm super excited about that. And I'm so happy. Now I don't have to feel jealous of Oklahoma. Nobody wants to do that. God bless Oklahomans. But I know several of these conservative issues. I know the transgender protection for girls' sports. There are a couple of other conservative issues that voters are very concerned about. Where do you stand on optimism that the Texas legislature, Republican majority, will get that done for voters?
Listen, I do feel good about it. I'm not going to foreshadow right now the items that I'll be putting on the special session. I know you'd love to be able to break that news right now. I'm going to hold that in my holster. I do want to make sure that you know, because I get this every day. I want you and your listeners to know that yes, I am going to sign the constitutional carry bill. It is going to be this next week. We'll have a big ceremony for it, and we will obviously make sure that Texans will be at the very front as it concerns their constitutional right to keep and bear arms. But that said, we will be taking up other conservative agenda items when we do call legislators back for a special session.
Well, but we'll be watching and waiting to see what happens. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Dana.
Take care.